Hey, everybody, welcome back to the channel. I've got a special guest, Jack from Nobody Special Finance. Now, Jack's channel is so underrated. He is in YouTube jail, and I'm trying to back my truck up to him and pull him out of the ditch. So when we get done here, go check out his channel. I'll leave a link in the description. There's certain things we can't talk about, and Jack just can't stand to get away from those things. How
You
you
know,
doing, buddy?
careful, Chris. I don't want to drag you down the mud with me. But I swear this is how the conversation went. When Chris calls me up, he says, "Man, what's going on with your channel? You've been at 34.2 forever." So I told him, "Yeah, man. I had a video got demonetized. I said something about China, showed a protester getting attacked, and man, I've been just in the YouTube jail ever since." Chris says, "Well, your buddy's truck stuck in the mud. What do? You pull him out." Thanks, brother. I appreciate that.
Do your best anyway. Okay, so Jack made a video the other day, maybe it was a day ago, about Japan and what's going on. I'd like to read a few things I highlighted, and we're going to focus in on them selling bonds. I'm pretty sure that's where Jack's going to really show up in here. But Japan's defense spending is going 2% of gross domestic product by 2027. Now, I read earlier that Japan unveiled on Friday a record 114 trillion yen is what they're going to, bolster up to. But that's only 863 billion. Now, how is this a big deal? I mean, how is, there's a lot of things going on right now. Biden's in Ukraine when he ought to be in Ohio. You got Little Rocket Man and his fireworks stand over there, shooting rockets up in the air. It's all he ever wants to do is play with rockets and flex his little flabby arms. And China's threatening the Philippines. It looks like we're about to go to war. It really does. This is kind of the pinnacle in my life where I've noticed, hey, this is very, very likely. And I want to get your take on the Japan side of things.
Yeah. So first of all, unless nobody told me, World War III hasn't started yet, right? I mean, we're not. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but hey, peace could break out at any moment.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
but since we're appear to be on autopilot heading towards World War III, and nobody is stopping to say, hey, maybe this isn't such a good idea, everybody. Japan, who has been since World War II a very pacifist country, they've had one too many North Korean missile tests sail right over their heads. The last one flew right over mainland Japan. So Japan has announced recently they are going to double their military spending. I think it was by 2027 was when they were planning to double it. So that would put their spending somewhere around 2% of GDP. Now,
So
Japan already operates at huge deficits. Go ahead. You were going to ask something?
no, it's like they were at 1%, right? They
Yep.
were at 1%. Now they're going to 2%. That doesn't seem like that big of a deal.
It is when you're Japan, though. See,
Okay.
there's this thing, nobody in the world is willing to lend money to Japan. And that's not a problem that was created overnight. Japan has been engaged in quantitative easing. Japan actually invented quantitative easing. Fun fact. I don't know if they invented it. Printing money to solve your problems is nothing new, but modern QE was basically invented by the Bank of Japan. They have been printing money and buying bonds, i.e., their central bank makes yen and buys bonds from the Japanese government since March of 2001. 23 years of uninterrupted money printing out of
Uh,
Japan.
I was going to guess the late 90s.
Yep.
Japan had a pretty good run, late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah. They've been doing everything they can to try to stimulate growth. I mean, they've had a couple of good reasons to, increase some government spending, right? They had the Tohoku earthquake and the tsunami. They had obviously the same the bat flu, if you will. I don't want to get you in trouble, bring you down in the doldrums with me if I talk about that one. But they've also had a population that's been in decline, a very low birth rate, a very aging population. A lot of the problems we have here in the States are magnified in Japan because their demographic problems are even worse than ours are. So Japan has just been on runaway money printing for decades. And some of the numbers are massive. And you have to keep in mind, Japan's a smaller country, right? So they don't deal in the trillions like we do, but they are the third largest economy in the world. This is not an insignificant event. They have 263% debt to GDP. All right. Take all the goods and services produced in the country in a year, they owe more than 2.5 times that much money. That's what their government owes. That's more than, or about double the US debt to GDP. So relative to the size of their economy, their debt pile is twice as big as even ours is, which made me go, holy, when I saw that. I knew their problem was big. I didn't realize it was that big. But it goes even beyond that, because half of their debt is held by their national bank or their central bank. The BOJ owns half of all outstanding JGBs or Japanese government bonds. Now, that's kind of like the Fed here, right? The Federal Reserve, they buy bonds from the government here in the States, but the Federal Reserve only owns 17% of the national debt. The Bank of Japan owns half of it. So all the things that our central bank has done wrong here, the money printing, the suppressing interest rates by buying up bonds and enabling government spending, everything we've done wrong, the Japanese have done it better and bigger than we have. And now there's a problem. Now Japan wants to double the size of their military. Well, that costs money, and they need to borrow it from somebody. Well, nobody's willing to lend money to Japan because Japan, with all this money printing and the buying of all these bonds, it has bid up the prices of these bonds so high that the interest rates are effectively zero. And they've actually been involved in a policy called yield curve control, where they've said, we're not going to let the interest rate on our 10-year JGB go above 0.5%, effectively zero. And they will print as much money and buy as many bonds as they need to maintain that interest rate. Unlimited money printing. They actually did this a little bit last night. In the middle of the night, they started buying up Japanese government bonds to keep those interest rates suppressed. Well, nobody is willing to loan money for 0.5% interest right now. Not when inflation is 6.5%. If you buy the government numbers, 15%. If you go by John Williams Shadow.
15%. That's crazy.
Yeah. So Japan has a problem. Japan has to let their interest rates rise. It's the only way to get any money to come back to Japan to borrow. There's no money to borrow in Japan. And they can't just keep monetizing their debt. They finally realized that. So this guy, Kuroda Hirohiko, he's out of there in April. He's done. His 5-year term at the head of the BOJ is up. They were going to give the job to this other guy named Amamiya. He didn't want the job, probably because whoever succeeds the current head of the BOJ is going to cause a massive problem when they let the interest rates rise. So nobody wants the job. They ended up giving it to this guy, Ueda Kazuo. He's an academic. It's debatable about how fast or how abruptly he's going to change things, but he's being brought in to change things, to let interest rates rise so they can cause this, so they can finance this military buildup. Now, that is actually a very big problem for the U.S.
So, okay, before you get into that, to fund spending for military facilities, warships, and other vessels, the government decided to issue in fiscal 2023 just over 434 billion yen of construction bonds. Now, that's interesting because they're usually used to finance infrastructure spending, but not military equipment. Now, this, I believe it's Fumio. It's like Fabio in Japan. He says, I believe those ships can be considered assets worth asking the people to share the cost. So it sounds like they're going to get a little bump in their what they have to pay in taxes. And I'm sorry, that was Suzuki told that to reporters. But what's the deal with the construction bonds and how's it going to affect us?
Well, they're taking a cue right out of our playbook with that one. I mean, when the law gets in your way, all you do is just change the definition to whatever you want it to be and then say, poof, we're in compliance with the law, right? It's not a recession. And, gender reassignment surgery now counts as infrastructure. Sure, why not? Like all this stuff, who knows what they'll call infrastructure. They'll just change the name to anything that they want, call it whatever they want in order to make it legal. And then it's up to somebody else to step in and stop them, and nobody's going to do that. So that's why they've been able to circumvent this massive spending on the military, which Japan's not supposed to do. They've adopted a pacifist approach to defense ever since World War II. Well, now they're just going to say, well, no, these are assets. These are investments in public infrastructure, even though destroyers and aircraft carriers and fighter planes, it's debatable whether or not those are assets.
Okay, well, if you're under attack, then I would say they are for sure.
So
But
here's the big thing. Here's the
yeah,
meat and
how exactly
potatoes.
does this affect us? How's this going to
That's
affect
where it
me?
is. Yep. So here's the problem. For 25, 30 years, money has left Japan. Anybody who had wealth got it out of Japan. They bought probably US treasuries, American stocks, also over and they sent money over to Europe, but predominantly to the US. Japanese wealth has fled Japan. Well, now what Japan is trying to do in letting these rates rise, they're trying to reverse that flow of capital back to Japan. All right. So that money has to come from somewhere. It's going to leave our market. So right now that money's sitting probably in United States government bonds. Well, when people start selling US government bonds to go buy Japanese government bonds, well, that has the effect of lowering the price of the American bonds, which sends the interest rates higher. Well, we're already raising interest rates here in the States, right? The Federal Reserve keeps hiking rates. The Federal Reserve is engaged in quantitative tightening. They're selling bonds or at least letting them mature and roll off their balance sheet. It's kind of like selling. They're just not outright selling it. So this change in policy at the central bank in Japan is going to put even more upward pressure on interest rates here in the United States at a time when interest rates, according to many, have already risen way too far, way too fast. And this is all going to start sometime around the end of March, early April. So it's just one more thing that's going to lead to higher rates, which could lead to more companies going bankrupt, the inability to refinance debt at lower interest rates. I mean, the housing market is already frozen solid. Stocks are not liking these higher rates. This is just one more thing that could create this, what I think is inevitable wave of defaults that's coming to the U.S.
Vehicle repos are as high as they were in the GFC in
Yeah.
2009. Vehicle repos, it's starting to show up. I mean, everything discretionary spending. Walmart just put out something that said they're seeing more people buy like the value items in the grocery section. People are cutting discretionary spending. We were 6 or 8 months early on this, if not more, telling people, hey, here's coming, it's coming. And, you get a lot of y'all are just doom and gloomers, but it's absolutely happening.
And hey, this affects credit cards. This affects auto loans, mortgages, everything, right? If this flow of capital for out of Japan and into the States suddenly starts to reverse, and it'll take a while for this reversal to happen. It's not going to be overnight. But if Japan wants the money to flow into their country, they're going to have to raise very fast. And so, it could raise borrowing costs at a time when we are more hopelessly addicted to debt and already struggling to make the payments on the debt we have. So you have to pay attention to what comes out of Japan over these next few weeks and months.
And even if it comes out over the next few weeks and months, it's like it's not going to really get here for a couple years. You know, they're all of this means a longer road for reducing Japan's debt, like they ever plan on doing that. As Tokyo aims to achieve a primary budget surplus, excluding new bond sales and debt service cost by the fiscal year ending 2026. So, what are we talking? 2 or 3 years before this really comes to fruition?
I mean, the whole concept of reducing debt, right? That's a fantasy now. We can't even
Yeah,
stop
true.
growing debt. So, and anybody who talks about reducing debt is paying pointless lip service to
Blowing
some
smoke.
ideology, right? Let's stop making it bigger before we talk about shrinking it. Right?
Yeah,
Baby steps.
that's a good idea. That's a good idea. Well, I don't know what $1 used to equal in yen, but right now $1 equals 132.59 yen.
Now, that's
So
another thing worth pointing out. The Bank of Japan has been defending the yen. They've been selling their stockpile of dollars to buy yen in order to keep the value of the yen from falling, as they've been printing so much of it to buy up their bonds. Well, they only have so much dollars to do that with. So they're burning through their pile of dollars to defend their currency right now. That's actually lowering the value of the USD. It's one of the reasons the US dollar has declined in value since about the start of November, I think, is when this decline started. It can't keep up forever. So Japan is going to make a mess. It's been this way for the last 25 years, and the debt market has adapted to it. And now that is going to change. It's going to cause ripples and knock-on effects all over the world, especially here in the States.
okay, one more in closing. the Evergrande thing. I'm going from Japan to China.
Okay.
Have we seen all of that yet?
No, we haven't.
I didn't think so,
Um,
because it's been a nothing burger so far.
no, that never went away. Um, Interestingly enough, I was just talking about this on my live stream last Friday. There was this Chinese banker, his name escapes me. It was FAN, Bao Fan, I think was his name. I may have got his name wrong. He was a very popular, like up and coming banker in Japan. He disappeared last week. Nobody knows where he went. I think they Jack Ma'd him. I don't know. You remember Jack Ma, the CEO of Alibaba? He very abruptly disappeared back in 2021. He was sent for some kind of re-education or something, and then he emerged a few months later and had nothing but nice things to say about Xi Jinping. Well, this very popular banker was disappeared last week, and at the same time, two prominent Chinese bankers were removed from their posts at the Chinese Communist Party. So and at the same time, the People's Bank of China, their central bank, their Fed, they are engaged in quantitative easing. They're injecting cash into their banking system at the fastest rate they've ever done. So something's up in the Chinese banking system right now when bankers get disappeared and bankers get kicked out of the Communist Boys Club. At the same time, money's starting to get printed in China. Something's up there, but it's really hard to get any accurate information out of China because they clamp down on the media, and anybody who says anything they don't like gets disappeared and sent for re-education. So no, that story's not dead. It's still sitting there. I mean, it's the same problem it's always been. They have trillions of dollars in debt, and they built entire cities that nobody wants to live in. So sooner or later, someone's going to be holding that bag.
The point of me pointing that out is that it just takes a while. It takes a long time for these things to, you know, come to pass. That's the biggest takeaway from any of this stuff is it's slow. All of it is just, don't get sidetracked. We're still entering the Thunderdome, guys. It's just a little bit slower. It really is like a slow motion train wreck. So, I hope that bankers aren't getting their organs harvested. They're really into that over there. Make no bones about it. This absolutely happens over there. And I hope that's not the case. But thank you for filling us in on Japan. I'll be watching it. I know if there's anything that comes out, you'll let me know and we'll do another video. And guys, go check out Jack's channel. Give him a like, give him a sub. He's got really good content. He works really hard on it, and his editing's great. He's on top of it. And I appreciate you coming on, man.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
All right, everybody. Have an awesome, awesome day. We'll see you in the next one. Later.